Hey, special educators. Welcome to Teach, Taskbox, Inspire, the podcast dedicated to making your job as a special education teacher easier by making your instruction more fun for you and your students. Inside each episode, you'll learn how to get the most use out of your task boxes in the classroom. I'm your host, Lisa Holliday from Chalkboard Superhero, a veteran special education teacher passionate about empowering you with purposeful teaching strategies, helpful tips and tricks, and other classroom management tools that will help you thrive in your role. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey there, teacher friends. Welcome back to another episode of Teach, Taskbox, Inspire, the show made just for special educators like you who are doing all the things with big hearts and full planners. Today, we're talking about something that comes with a lot of moving parts, personalities, and potential for chaos. Yep, you guessed it, co-teaching in special ed settings. Whether you're in an inclusion classroom, pushing into gen ed, or sharing space with another teacher or para, co-teaching can either be magic or mayhem. And let's be honest, some days it's both. So in this episode, I'm giving you real-life strategies for reducing the chaos, improving communication, and building a team dynamic that works for you and your students. So let's get into it. What makes co-teaching so tricky? Let's start with the elephant in the room. Why does it feel so hard sometimes? Because it's two teachers, one classroom, and a million different styles. You have different personalities, different approaches to behavior, different pacing, different expectations. And let's not forget, sometimes no one clearly defines who's doing what. So what happens? One person ends up doing all of the teaching. The other becomes kind of the quote unquote helper, and resentment builds. Does this sound familiar? But it doesn't have to be this way. When co-teaching is done well, it can be a beautiful balance of shared responsibility, mutual respect, and a powerful support for students who need it the most. The first key to reducing the mayhem: define the roles before the lesson ever begins. Who's leading the instruction? Who's modeling? Who's taking data? Who's circulating around the room? Even if it's just a quick hallway chat before the bell rings, take 60 seconds to decide who's going to take the lead. What are we targeting here? What's the plan if a student gets dysregulated? When the roles are clear, students know who to go to, and staff feel confident in their responsibilities. All right, this is a big one. The one teach, one support model, where one teacher teaches and the other one walks around, is often overused. And while it has its place, it can easily make one teacher feel like an assistant instead of an equal partner. So instead, try rotating roles. Some days you lead the lesson, other days you work with a small group while your co-teacher manages the whole group. Some of my favorite co-teaching models include station teaching, which is when you split the room up and you teach in small groups. There's also one called parallel teaching, where you teach the same content to two groups simultaneously. And then you have team teaching, both voices active in the same lesson. So mix it up and keep it fresh and balanced, right? Let's be real. Open communication is hard, especially if your co-teacher is new to special ed or isn't quite sure what your students need. But communication with the teacher, the gen ed teacher, is what keeps co-teaching from turning into that absolute chaos. So you want to try weekly check-ins, even if it's just 10 minutes on a Friday afternoon. Talk about what's working, what's not working, and what you need from each other, as long as you're feeling honest. But if things feel kind of tense, don't wait. Address it professionally and kindly. Remember, the goal is to build trust, not to avoid that conflict. And I know that sometimes it could be super awkward. You don't want to step on toes, you don't know what to say, but as soon as you have that, especially in the beginning, it'll be easier. All right, this one's for my self-contained classroom teams. Don't forget your paras. If you got paraprofessionals supporting students, they are part of your co-teaching team. Let them in on the lesson goals. Let them, know what's going on. Give them specific roles. Equip them with mini schedules or behavior plans or even prompts to use. The more informed they are, the more effective and confident they'll be. I found that when my paras know why we're doing something, the more engaged they are, or the more consistent. And a lot of times I would kind of let them take over, especially if it's something that we've done before. So morning meeting in a self-contained setting can get very repetitive. And if you have 5, paraprofessionals who really like to take the lead, you can always switch it up so that the students know that everyone in the room is a teacher. All right, I once worked with a gen ed teacher who was absolutely amazing, but she was fast-paced, high energy, and didn't really wait for anyone to catch up, especially not my students with processing delays. At first, I felt like I was constantly interrupting or trying to catch up my students up, and I'm running all over the place, and I'm like, excuse me, hold on, excuse me, hold on. So I suggested that we try parallel teaching. So we split the class, retaught the content at a slower pace with built-in visuals and supports. She kept her momentum with the rest of the class, and both groups thrived. So that little small shift helped my students participate more meaningfully, and I felt like an actual teacher, not just a floater or a TA, walking around the room. So I really do want you to slow down and think about the different types of teaching that you could do in that instance. And I will say all of this with a caveat, because the specific role that I have right now is I'm in an inclusion setting. I am a 5th grade special education teacher in inclusion. However, my role is not really co-teaching. I am in the middle school, and so I am bouncing around from classroom to classroom. I don't have one gen ed teacher that I'm pushing into. I have multiple, and I don't have the role of really co-teaching. And so sometimes you are, getting stuck in just kind of how it's laid out in the school that you're in. But what I find myself doing is a lot of, floating around the room, but I also speak up and join in and interrupt when necessary. Or I kind of step into the lesson and say, what about this? What about this? Especially if my students aren't getting what's being taught, I'll ask different questions, or I'll reframe what the lesson might look like, or reiterate something so that my students understand what's going on. I know that this is probably one of the most difficult things that you could do, because multiple personalities in a room, whether you're talking about paraprofessionals or the gen ed teacher, sometimes you don't mix. And after almost 2 decades of doing this and working in 5 different districts, I've learned that, not everyone's going to like you, or you can't please everybody. So sometimes you just don't get along with people, and that's okay too. I understand co-teaching can be overwhelming and awkward, and trying to build that trust and communication can be very hard. You have to find the right balance, and it is dreamlike when you finally find that one teacher you click with and you guys work so well as a team together and you're playing into it, and that is just a dream, right? That's what we want. So understand that it can be overwhelming, especially when expectations are unclear or communication is lacking. But with a little structure and a lot of planning, and really, I'm just going to keep saying this, some honest conversations, it can be one of the most powerful supports for students in special education. So whether you're pushing in or pulling out or kind of tag teaming in a self-contained setting, remember this: define your roles. Try to switch up those models. Communicate often and include everyone on the team. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this episode gave you a few aha moments, I'd love for you if you'd share it with a co-teacher or a pair that you work with. And hey, send me a DM on Instagram and tell me your biggest co-teaching win or struggle. I love connecting with you. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Teach, Taskbox, Inspire. I hope you've gained some tips and motivation to fuel your week ahead. If you're ready to explore more strategies for empowering your students as independent learners, be sure to dive into my free training at chalkboardsuperhero.com/training. And don't keep all this knowledge to yourself. Share this episode with your special education teacher friends who could use some motivation and inspiration. One more thing before you go. If you're finding this podcast helpful and want to show support, head to Apple Podcasts and leave your rating and review. Until next time, keep teaching, taskboxing, and inspiring.